Welcome to the School District of Waukesha's Board of Education Teaching and Learning Committee meeting for Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. We begin our agenda this evening under general business. Verification of the meeting being posted. Stacy, has the meeting been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. Now is the opportunity for any public comment from any of our residents or citizens to speak to the committee this evening. Stacy, do we have anyone?
No.
That's coming forward. Okay. Next, we have a Bright Lights presentation from Bethesda. Mr. Martin, the principal, is here to introduce his team. They're going to be talking to us about Mindful Maze. So turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Marr. I'm the school principal over at Bethesda Elementary, and we're happy to be here tonight to talk about Bright Lights. This is about year 4 over at Bethesda as a principal, and we've been working really hard to establish a strong social emotional learning curriculum and introducing second step as well as zones of regulation. And I'm joined tonight with Amanda DeSua, there's also Allison Gonzalez, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Just wanted to say that we had an opportunity to meet with a very strong community partner, Greenwood State Bank, and they were able to give us a grant last year to supplement some of the materials that we had, as well as purchase a lot of the equipment for the Mindful Maze that you're going to see. So we created a nice video that explains quite a bit, but I'll turn the time over to these two because they're more of experts in this area.
So as Jeremy mentioned, for the past 4 or 5 years, we have really been working on our SEL curriculum at the universal level at Bethesda. The teachers have been implementing second step with fidelity, and more recently we added the zones of regulation as a universal tool. When we received the donation from Greenwood State Bank, we purchased materials to ensure that every classroom had a calming corner in it that included similar manipulatives and visuals, so it was consistent across the building. We also purchased the materials to make a mindful maze in our main hallway. We plan to expand the mindful maze to reach door to door, you'll see when we play the video. And then our long-term goal is to expand the mindful maze throughout the entire school. And we have a video to go along with it. Make a mindful hallway. We also had support from a parent and grandparent of Bethesda to help us design and create the path.
We know that when our bodies and brains are experiencing stress, it is difficult to learn. Mindful mazes or sensory halls encourage students to reach their full potential by providing space for them to calm their minds and bodies, practice breathing, and regain a sense of control. They can also help release stress and cope with different emotions. The Bethesda Mindful Maze starts with taking a deep breath at the labyrinth-like maze. We then go into squashing bugs. Words are written in English and in Spanish. Followed by a hopscotch involving some math. We then let students wander through the solar system and explore the planets and even look at a rocket taking off into space. We then have a snake path, and we try to reinforce our second step and zones of regulation, social and emotional learning by helping students identify how they feel and practice breathing.
My favorite part is everything. I could just ask my teacher. The path is really calming. By doing like a maze, step on this, maybe you can use like this, and relaxing to do when you're like sad or kind of nervous.
And I'll take any questions you might have after that video.
Mr. Baumgart.
I'm looking for the intent when they're going through those various physical moves. Is it to get their mind off of something else, or?
Absolutely. I like the analogy when your computer's acting up, any tech person will tell you to shut it down and restart. And I think it really does that for a lot of students. If the classroom is triggering them in a way and making them feel dysregulated, just leaving. And they don't abuse it. They do the maze and they go back in a different headspace. So it's a nice little reset for them.
Thank you.
Mr. Como.
Can you give us a feel for how often the maze is used, and do you see a tendency for more of the younger kids or the older kids, or that doesn't really matter? Just sort of a sense of the use.
And you can certainly jump in. But yeah.
Well, due to our mitigation, not as many kids are in the hall. However, they do have to travel down that hall for every lunch period. So every time a child is walking down the hall, they're either hopscotching or they're squishing bugs or they're doing something. Some teachers plan to bring their kids down there at certain times of the day to use it, as well as some of our resource teachers will be using that as well for some of the kids for their breaks that they earn through the day as well. So yeah, it is used by old and young, for sure.
I do it sometimes too.
I'll be honest, I do it as well.
And does it work for you too?
It does, because especially when I'm really stressed, I'll just kind of...
Excellent, thank you.
Anything else?
So that means it's available to school board members too, right?
Absolutely.
Open the door.
Could you tell me what parents' knowledge of that maze is? Are they aware of it, and do they know the purpose of it?
Well, like Allison said, we had a couple of parents that actually helped put it together,
Right.
Which was very instrumental. And we have blasted some things out in our newsletters, and we also plan to share this video with them as well after we share it with you tonight. So
Very good.
Definitely, and I know that some of the kids have been talking because I know the feedback gets back to us as well as like, hey, this is a cool little thing in the building, and for the parents it's hard because they're not able to be in the building
Right.
yet. But yeah, it's out there for sure.
Very good. Mr. O'Brien.
So I wonder if there could be some sort of display set up to explain to like a visitor what you have there, like a mindfulness display, so that when parents come into the school, they can say, they can look at that and say, okay, now we understand, and then maybe seek some of that out for themselves, considering some of the parents that we've run into recently.
Yeah, that's a fabulous idea. As Allison mentioned, we really have visions of adding on to it, and maybe even just a welcome to the Mindful Maze might better introduce it for visitors that are coming in. One thing I really love about it, I'm just at Bethesda on Fridays, but I see kids using it as they come in, and it is very centrally located. So visitors are certainly going to be able to find it easily. So.
And I'm glad the principal's able to get some benefit out of there. I thought we might have to design a special one for him.
Absolutely. And what's really nice is that the grant that they gave us too allowed us to purchase the machine so that the maintenance of it will be easier, and the additions as well, because then it's just the price of the vinyl, and then we could print nearly any design that we would like. And we have some really talented artistic people that are able to envision that and put it together. So that's what we have, and we, like we said, we want to continue that from door to door as well.
Anything else? Certainly want to thank you for being here tonight, highlighting your new venture that you've implemented at your school, and encouraged to hear that it's already been successfully implemented and utilized, and we look forward to others having the opportunity to see it and view it and hear about it as well. So thank you very much for being here tonight representing
Thanks for
your
having
school.
us. Thanks for having us.
Next, we move on to our action items. The first action item is approval of the teaching and learning minutes from our November 3rd, 2020 meeting.
I move approval.
Chroma, thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. Mr. Baumgart? We have a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes from November 3rd, 2020. Any further discussion, questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes, Stacy, 5-0. Moving on to our next action item, approval of an overnight field trip request. This request is for band and choir students at West High School for an 80th anniversary Pearl Harbor Day Parade in Honolulu, Hawaii. The dates are December 3rd, 2021 to December 9th, 2021. And we have Kaylee Granzo here tonight to talk about the trip and to answer any questions that the committee might have. So welcome, Kaylee.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. I'm also here with Stephen Matson, my colleague at West.
Okay.
So we were given an email, actually, Mr. Ryan Patt, our principal at West, was given an email inviting the West bands to Hawaii during their 80th celebration of Pearl Harbor, which happens to be next year. The dates in the program that I asked for are kind of close. We're looking for whatever airfare is easiest, and so it'll be within those days, and we're just hoping that it stays that way. This is a great opportunity for our kiddos. They would be able to march the parade down by Waikiki Beach in Hawaii. Not many people can say that they've been there, so I think that first of all is a fantastic opportunity. While there's going to be a huge opening ceremony, and the Military Forces Pacific Band will be holding a huge performance of all the bands that are there. We'd play Hymn to the Fallen as a full everybody group. There will be speakers from survivors from Pearl Harbor, and there's only like 4 or 5 left living today, and so they'd be able to have that opportunity to hear what they have to say and really live in that moment and understand what that's like. While there, we'll also be able to do all kinds of significant things around the island. We'll get to go to Pearl Harbor itself and go onto the USS Missouri as well as Arizona. They'll be able to see all the memorials and everything there. And then we also have an opportunity to perform either at Pearl Harbor or at the Polynesian Cultural Center. So 3 performance opportunities is pretty substantial in one of these type of programs. But it would overall tons of really great opportunities for our kiddos, and it's never going to happen again. So once in a lifetime would be very, very cool. So what questions do you have?
Mr. Baumgart.
I don't have any questions. I have a couple comments. Typically, I'm one of the ones that's more reluctant to go on these long trips like this for the students. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's very different in my mind. I did view the video that you sent to us, too. Very nice. I envision 2 important factors in here that stand out towards making me like this. Mm-hmm. That is, what a tremendous history lesson for those kids that many of us have never had, or have never taken at least. And it's one of the most historical things we should remember, and it's there. Mm-hmm. The other thing is the fact that we were invited to participate in this, representing Wisconsin, is, in my mind, comparable to some of the things we do in sports and other things where you are recognized as you accomplish something. This is a recognition worth responding to. So I am very much in favor of this. I will at this time make a motion in favor of this overnight field trip requested.
Ms. Roddy, thank you very much. We have motion and second. How about any further discussion? Questions? Mr. O'Brien?
So, considering, I think we're going through a process right now where we're trying to reconnect maybe with our history, and I think it's a good idea. I think the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor is probably as good as it gets with reconnecting with our most recent history, where there's very few survivors left to tell the story, and who knows how many will be still surviving by the time this goes. But I think it's important that in addition to taking a field trip like this, that West have an academic focus on, especially West Band, but as much as West can on Pearl Harbor, going prior to the trip. And I mean, if we're sending representatives of the school all the way to Hawaii, and I think it's important for us to know why we're there as a school community and know the history of it. So I'm kind of like Mr. Baumgart, I'm also one of those people who would maybe be more, I'd take a sharp eye to a trip like this, but this particular trip I don't see a problem with. But I do think we should encourage West, if they're going to send the band on a field trip like this, that there has to be an academic correlation across the entire school community at West.
Okay.
If we're going to send our people to a trip like this. So I'd hope Ms. Landish could get them prepared for that as they go into the next school year, and to send our marching band off to represent the school. There should be some sort of academic across the entire school.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that both the gentlemen have made. I think a wonderful learning opportunity. It's not this boondoggle thing. This is learning opportunity. And to be able to perform and to be recognized as a band that is of the quality that West puts out on a continuous basis is wonderful. I don't know if you're aware, we had approved a trip for a foreign language 8th grade class or school, and we had approved that in 2019, and due to COVID, we still haven't given them final approval yet. We're still trying to figure things out. They're targeting to go in June. And so I guess I just want to, put down a warning or a caveat that we don't know where COVID is going, how long it's going to be around. But this committee and this board always has the ability to, after approval, to say, hey, due to the circumstances,
Absolutely.
we can't let.
Absolutely. And we were supposed to go on a trip this spring as well, and that got canceled.
So you've experienced that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We know what it's like, and we understand that, life happens, and sometimes you got to roll with the punches. So.
And unfortunately, that's where we're at. But I just, we need to make sure that everyone is aware that things could change. But holy cow, I hope we're not going to be at that point next year, and that this opportunity is one, because you can't go back. I mean, it's
Absolutely
80th anniversary once, period. And so yeah, I think this is a great opportunity.
Thank you.
So,
Go ahead, Mr. O'Brien.
yes, and I'm not as concerned about COVID on this because at least it's a domestic trip, right? We're going from one state to another state. I also think that part of it should be understanding why Hawaii's a state and the history of Hawaii, not just about World War II, but Hawaii as a state and its history is unique too. within the history of this country. So, like I said, we should try to take, if we're going to do something like this, we should try to make it
Absolutely.
as
And-
educational as possible for the entire student body.
Yeah, and if during one of the performances that we have, either at Pearl Harbor or the Polynesian Cultural Center, it's to demonstrate more patriotic music. So while performing those pieces, we will be digging in and figuring out why those were written and what they're for, and then we can take that and cross curriculum, go to social studies classes. We could do a performance at a football game because we're all there already, and we'd be able to do a lot with the student body that way.
Good. Anything else from committee members? Ms. Landish?
Just a comment. This makes me want to be a high school principal again because it's all about the chaperone.
For a moment.
Nonetheless, Callie and I can definitely work with Mr. Pat next year to figure out that all academic correlation, no question. I think, too, I just will put this on my calendar that it's happening in a year so that we remember to celebrate this for West either before they go or after. So this will be coming back to you in some way. So.
Thank you.
Good. Anything else? Okay. So we have a motion and a second for the approval of the West High School field trip for the 80th anniversary to Pearl Harbor Parade in Honolulu, Hawaii. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes. Stacy, 5-0.
Thank you.
Being here tonight. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Our last action item this evening is the approval of the middle school schedule for 2021, 2020. And this evening we have Rob Bennett, principal at Les Paul Middle School, Bob Blessington, principal at Horning Middle School, Jason Sadowski, principal at Butler Middle School, and Rachel Herman, our director of secondary learning. Welcome back. Go ahead.
I was late to the meeting yesterday because I teach later than everyone else. Yeah, so I got into the meeting and they said, you're doing the whole thing.
Oh,
I'll wait for Jason to get. So, hey, we're the middle school scheduling group once again. I know it. Oh, sorry. There we go. Hi, okay. We're the middle school scheduling information group. We've been spending the past, year and more than a year, or approximately a year, looking into our scheduling options for changing the schedule at the middle school to allow for more literacy time and still allow for our elective opportunities in 8th grade. And so I'm just introducing us here tonight, though we have a much larger committee. We have Ryan Green from Les Paul and Rob Bennett, principal of Les Paul. I'm Jamie Dringenberg from Horning Middle School, and I teach at Waukesha West. Bob Lessington from Horning, the principal. Rochelle isn't with us this evening, but she's from Butler, and Sarah Vandenhoevel from Butler as well, and Jason Sadowski, principal at Butler.
Okay, so I get the data slide again. So we just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to review the data with you. The last time that we were together, I shared quite a lot about the CLM model and the differences in how literacy instruction with that model occurs at the middle school level. Currently at the 6th and 7th grade level, there is an extended double block for literacy instruction during which the CLM components occur, and sometimes even then it's a tight fit to get everything in. In 8th grade, we attempt to do the same work in half the time, or one class period, So we tried to shift it, students do reading and writing outside of class, so that our in-class time is focused on the close reading, analysis, mini lessons, literature discussion groups, and as much conferring as possible. But truthfully, that is the biggest struggle with our current schedule, is that there's never enough time for conferring, and of course that was pre-COVID, so you can imagine the tight fit at this point. We know that conferring is the heart of the workshop model, and also the piece most affected by that lack of instructional time. And so it makes sense why we tend to see an increase in scores for that same group or cohort of students as you move from 6th to 7th grade forward reading test scores, where there is time for all of those CLM components, and a decrease in scores moving from 7th to 8th grade, where there is not. And of course, that's all a review from the last time that we were together. But we also wanted for you to consider the point that has been added to this slide. According to the source Reading Between the Lines, which was an ACT publication of 2006, a student's performance around complex text is the clearest differentiator in reading between students who are more likely to be ready for college and those who are less likely to be ready. So allowing more time in 8th grade literacy for teachers to explicitly teach those reading skills rather than focusing more on a disciplinary literacy approach, students will be more likely to be able to read grade level complex text, which is exactly what we want for our students to be able to do. And then we just wanted to remind you, as a committee, we did consider several priorities when we were creating a new schedule for the middle school students and staff. Those things included moving to a house model at each of the middle schools, maintaining that longer literacy block across 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, having common planning time for teachers, having a flexible period for students to revisit learning, and allowing for blocked time or longer class periods, especially for the core classes. And we really wanted for all students to have the opportunity to experience all of the elective departments. I'm going to turn this over to Ryan, who's going to talk about the possibility of variation within our proposed schedule.
Is it on? Kick the whole thing over. Good evening again. Hello again. And so this is one of the first slides that might actually start to look a little different than what we had shared last time. And it's not a change in our approach so much as just a change in the model to try to bring a little bit more detail than we had last time. If you look at like the first 6 units, we had just kind of general core on there in our mind, thinking of the flexibility within the core content that is taught by each team. And we thought it was needed to bring a little bit more clarity to that by putting in some subjects. And I think this speaks to the team or the house model and how those teachers would be working together to meet the needs of their students. You see the literacy teacher and social studies teacher working together in math and science in this particular model. And it was kind of mentioned by Sarah as well, that this is just one model. There are literally dozens of models that we could use this 8-unit period or 8-unit structure to achieve these goals. And it's kind of, a lot of those are going to be driven by enrollment and staffing, and then at each building or grade level, the needs of, or the strengths of the staff and the needs of the student is how I would say that. And just check my notes. Again, I think the strength of this model, or of sharing this particular model, is that it really helps us focus on the 8-unit period. And I think throughout our conversations, both in our committee and when we've presented at the board, is a lot of talk or language used around like 8 periods versus 7 periods. And really, that's been kind of where our team has settled on. We need to focus on them, viewing them as units that we can use more flexibly, not only next year, but into the future. And that's the part that will give us, I guess, the flexibility that we're looking for with the added time in literacy. So 8-unit day here with a little bit more detail than last time. And I think that covers it. So I'll pass it off to Rob.
So in the executive summary, this slide encapsulates that summary of moving from our 7-unit day to an 8-unit day, which would really keep 3 pillars and 3 vital components for us. That would be to increase that time in literacy in 8th grade for student achievement, increase time in the core areas in grades 6 and 7, Again, student achievement focused. And then to maintain the same amount of electives in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, giving those kids a well-rounded experience and opportunity, creating flexibility with fidelity, all with student interests in mind. So really at this point, we're seeking a motion to approve the proposed changes to the middle school schedule structure.
Mr. O'Brien.
I'll move to approve the schedule structure.
Seconded.
Thank you. Mr. Baumgart? How about questions, comments? Mr. O'Brien?
Quick question. How long is a unit in time? And in the conjunction of that is, my biggest concern with it is, it doesn't mean that we're constantly, with each unit, having kids move around, because the big thing is we don't want them to spend so much time moving rather than.
Right.
I assume these units are going to be used in a way where it becomes a flexible time that's going to be reallocated based on how you guys start to develop this program. That would be my guess, right?
Yes. So if you're looking at clock time within those units, anywhere from a 47 to 50-minute unit, how we utilize passing time, like you said, combining some times of classes together where kids would not need to utilize passing time to become much more flexible to meet the needs of students. So then you're gaining those minutes back where kids would be transitioning, that they're in the class, using that time as learning is the constant and the time is the flexible piece.
So just to follow up on that, it could be that as you guys get into this in year 2, that you even said there's a difference in the length of the units, but those lengths could continue to change. I mean, you could say it could be a group of 245s, 255s, and something like that. It doesn't have to be. It sounds to me like it's trying to create a flexible time schedule.
Yes.
By using these units, which are kind of blocks of time, really.
Yes.
It's not a block schedule, but it's blocks of time. And how do we assign that to this learning program that you're trying to put together?
The learning and the achievement will be the constant and the strive. How we utilize those minutes will be the flexible pieces, making sure we stay true to the fidelity of the curriculum, as Sarah was talking about, to be able to deliver that instruction. So making sure the fidelity of the curriculum, the standards, targets are all met, utilizing the time in the most effective and efficient way.
So as a principal, aren't you going to have, I would think you would have different groups battling for different segments of time. If you made the time segments flexible, a science teacher doing lab might say, I need more time.
And I think that would be a strength because everyone wants their time with kids and that learning piece to take place, but also knowing if we're going to stay true to the fidelity, those things will have to be managed carefully to make sure that there aren't waivers to the things that need to be done to ensure that fidelity of the curriculum being delivered.
Because when I see 3 segments, if we go back to that block, the unit. So when I see 3 segments for literacy and social studies and 3 segments for math and science, it seems like that's an awfully long time for literacy and social studies and to pair it up with math and science, depending upon how you go about it in the middle school program, I guess.
And Jason can talk to it too. Yeah, just how people are going to be utilizing those things, thinking about increasing that literacy time. So in those 3 units, 2 of those could be the literacy piece and 1 piece for the social studies. Cross collaboration could take place where the standards and targets are being met through the different contents to be able to have that true rich academic experience.
Well, I could see the 3 units in the morning being 35 minutes and, just changing the times based on how the program works out, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And like Ryan said, this is one of many different options. And I wouldn't say like this is what we run every single day for one team. They could run this for a week and then they could, within the team, they could change what that structure looks like the next week. But that's where the team has that collaboration around what is this going to look like from week to week. I know right now our personalized learning programs do that, where they have a block of time that they then create a schedule within their own within their own program. The other piece, kind of one of the things that you asked is like, how do we manage that as an administrative team? So one of the, to making sure that each one there's a validity into each of the curriculums. And that's where one of the pieces that we have to come up with, and we've already started to have that discussion, is around what is the minimal amount of time for each area that is required per week, to make sure that they're not fighting over this, and they're really having that balance, but that curriculum, that there's still a substantial amount of time in each of the areas to make sure that it's credible. So that's the one thing that we have yet to finalize, but we started that initial discussion of what the minimum amount of time per week would be.
What's the time when the start time for children at the middle school in the morning?
7:30.
I think you guys have been here long enough where Dr. Gray was talking about starting school too early, particularly for the high school kids.
Mm-hmm.
I assume all secondary kids, it's a little bit too early. Is that study still underway or still a consideration? And obviously it wouldn't really change this plan much if we change the start time, obviously. Has anyone been looking at that?
We did study it, and it got stopped at the cost of transportation. When you look at our two-tiered busing system, please don't quote me exactly, but if we did a full flip that aligned, I think the middle school and high school start times, got them a little bit closer together, put the elementaries early, secondaries later. We were looking at the addition of $1 million to $2 million in transportation costs, if my memory is serving me correct. And given that we're cutting $3 to $4 million a year out of the budget, it was prohibitive to move forward with that based off just transportation.
And if I could add on to that, that was actually part of our discussion as a middle school group, is how can we look at getting more time at the middle level? But there was, again, it was back to the transportation concern, because that was another option we were looking at, is adding another 10 to 15 minutes on the school day.
Mr. Baumgart.
Thank you. Couple comments. I'm kind of encouraged by what I'm seeing here for a couple points. One is it introduces a little bit more flexibility than a specific bell to bell to bell type of an arrangement. You have much more flexibility to getting something done, maybe at a cost of a couple of minutes here or there, whatever it is. Have to trust professionals to handle that. So that's one part of it that I like. The other is I see an opportunity for integration. I mean, when you talk about literacy up on the top there, that doesn't necessarily have to be about reading a book. It could be about reading a history book. And those two can be combined. And I see the opportunity for some integration, like we've been talking about with math now for some time. But it seems to fit well here. I also want to compliment you on what you've come to. What must be a year and a half, 2 years ago, this started.
Yes.
And it was a little bit of a antagonistic approach to things coming at us, and it was, there was a lot of tension going on out there for a while. And you backed things up and got people involved in it, in finding a solution. And I think this is a good example of allowing the professionals, which I'm putting that at that end of the room. Greg, not disappointing you, you're also a professional teacher. But, I mean, what I'm seeing here is what it should be. The professionals have come up with an answer to the question that we were worried about, but we aren't the professionals when it comes to running a school. And so I want to compliment you on what you've achieved and what I anticipate will work well. If not, I also anticipate, and this is where the board would become a factor, if something doesn't work well, you'll probably have to come back to us, or we'll come back to you, whatever it is. I'm very pleased with what you've shared with us this evening. I want you to know that. Thank you.
And I just want to say those words mean a lot to this group and the confidence. It was all out of the passion and the integrity to do best by the kids. And that's what we're trying to do. And the voices of the teachers, the 30 plus that were in that committee, all focused on one thing, and that's the kids that we see each and every day, and that's speaking volumes. And you brought up some points about the flexibility that can be there. Mr. O'Brien talked about we're reducing transitions to have more meaningful minutes for kids. Our teachers are doing amazing things in those minutes, and this is hopefully going to provide them more of an opportunity to have a deeper impact beyond what they're already doing.
Mr. Como.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, a year ago, I wasn't sure where this was going to go. I wasn't feeling comfortable with making a motion. I don't think anyone was feeling comfortable with making a motion. And you guys just rolled up your sleeves and you continue to work hard. So thank you for that. I do have just one question on this slide here. First of all, I like that you were able to keep the house intact in that approach. Very important. We've been hearing that. When we went away from that structure, we got yelled at and we heard about it over time, and now we're back to it. And boy, if we didn't have that incorporated into this, I don't think you'd be here. This would be a motion on the floor for consideration right now. So thank you for that. But going to your slide here, can you tell me who is in a team? And are there multiple teams in a house potentially? What that team might look like?
So team house, we're using the term, team would be, I guess, the definitions of teams. I thought I had it on.
Interchangeably?
Yeah, they're kind of interchangeably. House is a little bit tighter than a team. Team, I would categorize that as the same group of this group of students are with the same teachers throughout the day, but the classrooms are spread out throughout the building. A house would be more of the same concept, but the classrooms are right next to each other.
Really close. Okay.
So we're going to be kind of in the same boat because we may have some classrooms that are dangling outside, but the concept, the overall concept is the same thing, team house, depends on who you talk to. So really what you see here would be one house. And most likely a two or four person house could run this pretty smooth, this concept, what you see in front of you, pretty smoothly.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien.
So, this is us saying yes to this doesn't mean a whole lot. What it means is what it's going to end up being as you launch it. I still see it as a work in progress, right? I mean, that's kind of what you came here last time and said, and I said, well, I wanted to see more progress, even if it's a work in progress, and I think we have that. But again, we're approving it kind of in a little bit of, it's going to be interesting to see what you make of it. I think that's the way I see it. Because it's still a little bit of an open book, but I understand where you're trying to take it, at least, and that's the important
Ms. Roddy.
Yes, thank you. Everything that we do is always a work in progress. So
that's true.
Good point. So if we stop, then we're not doing what we should be doing. But anyhow, the Quest and Compass programs, how are they affected by this, if anything at all? I know they're kind of in their own little bubble usually, but just curious how that's going to work.
We don't anticipate major concerns that this will affect them.
They just come out of their areas for their specials and things like that.
But that is correct.
To joke about a term, they'd be the cottage compared to the house. They're a little bit smaller scale, not quite as many students potentially, and that's really maybe a difference.
Good job running with the analogy. I appreciate that. And I agree with my fellow board members here, and I appreciate the work that went behind it. You guys have been working on this for a long time. You've added the voices that need to be added. Your confidence presenting it gives me the confidence in.
Could someone answer for me if this is approved tonight, what your immediate next steps would be
So the next part of the process is going to be really talking about what this transition looks like from right now to next year. And then from that point on, we still have a little bit more discussion on electives, what's going to be offered and when and so forth. The other piece is, like Mr. O'Brien said, is the idea of this 8-unit structure. We're not happy. We're not like 100% satisfied with it as a team, as a whole team. We want to dig into further of what other options can we do, because even though I put this out there, is not 100% of our staff are confident of running this collaborative group. So we're going to have variations of this right now. We want to have something that all of us are very comfortable in running. So we still, to answer your question, absolutely, like that's still our intent. Over this next year, we are going to be digging deeper into what different versions of modified block can we still run with an A-B structure that we still have to maintain at the middle level.
But the electives, they need to be determined pretty quickly, right? Is it January when the students are going to be picking their classes for next year?
That is correct.
Yep. January 22nd is that when it will all start. And the work too is the transition, because our 6th and 7th graders are already partially through this process. As our 8th graders exit us, this doesn't impact them, but our 6th and 7th graders and our new incoming 6th graders will all be in a different phase. So it is a work in progress that has to take some time to progress. So it meets the needs of all of those transitions.
So Brian.
So, our approval is, we're one step and then the full board step happens. Between now and the full board meeting, we got 10 days. I think the important part is, assuming that this passes tonight, that you guys work out a really good communication plan with staff, because it'd be unfortunate if we got a lot of negative feedback because they didn't feel they were included. Between now and the full board meeting, you're not going to please everybody, but let's do the best we can. And because, if I get enough pushback between now and the full board meeting, maybe I'll change my vote. But I don't expect to, but I'd like to know that if we approve this tonight, the communication is going to be strong enough where we don't get that massive pushback between now and the full board. Okay?
Anything else? Okay, at this time, we're going to be voting on the approval of the middle school schedule for 2021-2022. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Stacy 5-0. Nice job, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. And we look forward to having you back in the future with an update, or updates, I guess, as we move along. Thank you. Moving into our discussion information items this evening, we have Mathematics Vision 2020 and an update on the pilot resources that this school year have been used to support the integrated math courses. And we have, let's see, we have Dan Pochinski, I think, here tonight, one of our instructional math coaches, and Rachel Herman, our Director of Secondary Learning. Dan and Rachel we have, and then I guess we
Our
have
math teachers that were here.
more team members, but
As they set up, I just want to bring to
go
your
ahead, Ms. Landish.
attention the two handouts on your desk to help supplant the presentation this evening. One is just the reminder of the course sequence again, so you can visually see this. It's always good to have this, in your hand, I think, at least for me, while we're talking through this. And I also did print out for you the rubric for consideration. They're going to give you their recommended resources this evening, but they went through every single vendor and every single rubric header. This by far is the most thorough process that we have conducted in my time here. So the recommendations come very strong, very collaborative process, and so that's what they'll take you through.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Turn the mic on.
I'm so excited. I'm chaperoning a trip to Hawaii, I learned, and we just approved a middle school schedule, so like I'm on cloud 9 right now. Well, I will learn. I haven't figured that one out yet, but it's on my to-do list. So I am here tonight with the same team we were with you last month, but we have Nicole Hurley over at West. We have Leslie Welts, who is an instructional coach, Adam McDonald, who is over at South, Shelby Vogue, who is over at North, and then Dan Paczynski, who is the math mastermind in the district over at Horning and Banting this year. So we are going to take you through tonight a recommendation of the math resource that we'd like to move forward. So we're looking at Agile Minds and then CPM. We're going to share with you some of the student feedback that has been collected throughout this process, some of the teacher feedback, the cost of the resource, as well as our planned next steps. So Jody just shared, we just wanted to highlight some of these same reminders about what we have done as we've gone through this process. So if we look back to when this originally originated, we looked at 8 different resources, and we took those resources through a rubric to narrow them down to 3. It was really important that whatever resource we landed on aligned clearly to our math vision. Last spring and then into this year, teachers piloted all 3 resources, and that was really important. We didn't want a teacher to only use one and then have a vote, right? We wanted you to try out all 3 before you made your recommendation. We collected student feedback. So last month we shared we had over 400 students who responded with their feedback. We collected teacher feedback, community, and college feedback. 2 weeks ago, we brought the entire math department from all 3 schools, came together, including we had representation from eAchieve, and they had a very lengthy 2.5, I think, hour meeting that we spent looking at what resource we were going to be recommending. And so the team here tonight is going to walk you through that process and walk you through how we landed on the recommendation of Agile Minds and CPM.
Good evening. I'm here to talk just in general about Agile Mind and give you some of the highlights of it. Some of the things that really stood out to us is that it applies a lot of real world applications to it. Versus a lot of just the procedural things. It still has that procedural things, but it really incorporates a lot of that real world problem solving. It integrates a lot of interactive animations, which we found very tactile for kids to use on their iPad versus some manipulatives. Also encourages a lot of group work, individual work, partner work, lots of different avenues that could be applied there. Really brings a lot of those Wicker strategies in Avid. Sometimes when we talk about Wicker, that reading component, sometimes it's always like, how does it work in math? In this program, it really comes forward, and that's where I can see the reading. And so that one, I'm really excited to use that in the classroom more, because sometimes that was always hard of like reading a story problem. We'd always say, well, this has more in depth than just a regular old story problem. The nice thing with it is it carries that problem throughout the course of the unit. And so you can always link back to, hey, remember a couple weeks ago when we started this? And kids are like, oh yeah. And they tie that together throughout the course of the whole chapter. So I really like that part. So the last part is each part has a launch, an investigate, and a debrief. And it's consistent from unit to unit. And so it does bring that consistency for the kids.
And as we mentioned last time we were here, for dual language, we are going to be implementing CPM, which stands for College Preparatory Math. And I'll start with the end. The one thing that is really pleasing is that Agile Mind is probably the one of the three resources that is most compatible with CPM, with the way their philosophy of learning, which is through problem solving and through a storyline that continues throughout the units. It also has a great support of WICOR strategies and a great emphasis on collaboration and discussion. And the part, of course, that we are really caring about CPM is that at the touch of a button, you can see on my little image there with the arrow, you can simply click on where it says Lección, ESP, and that takes you to the entire thing now in Spanish. So that is really one of the components that we thought was remarkable. We know how difficult it is to translate a resource and provide it available for our students, and so we're very pleased with it.
Good evening, everybody. I want to go a little bit through the student feedback. So we had 436 different students respond and provide their feedback on each, not on all the resources together. So the question you're probably wondering is, what did they say about Agile Mind? And first of all, we wanted to get a perspective from a varied group of students. So the first thing we ask students is, how do they perceive themselves in terms of their strengths in mathematics? So looking at three different categories, kids who rank themselves as highly successful in math, moderately successful in math, or not as successful in mathematics, each of those three groups of students, right, all of the students, rated Agile Mind or recommended Agile Mind at a greater percentage than any of the other three resources. So when we talk about trying to get kids, being able to meet all kids' needs and differentiate the way our teachers really want to be able to do, our students recommended this the highest. So that was really huge for us. The second thing that kids said is that they found that Agile Mind was slightly challenging, right? It was in that perfect proximal zone of development that we really want kids to be able to be challenged, but not, not discouraged. And that's huge for us. So those two pieces of information is really what stood out for us.
And then looking at some of the teacher feedback that we had during our discussions, some things that really stood out to us was the focus on student conceptual understanding of the mathematics, not just how, but why does it work that way? And why do lines look the way they do? So really helping students to understand that why behind the how. And we think that's really important opportunities for our students. We already referenced the animations that Agile Minds has, but for our EL students or for students who might need some support in their reading, as there is a lot of reading in the Agile Minds curriculum, the animations I think really give a great visual for students to be able to see in addition to reading the mathematical explanations. And then again, Agile Minds really aligns with our WICR that we are already working to incorporate, and it's built right in. Here's where students can write. Here's where they're going to inquire. Here's where they're going to collaborate and how they can be organized and where they can read, so that it will be embedded in every single lesson in class for all of our students.
Okay, and then going back to the rubric that Mrs. Landish was nice enough to print out for everybody. That's if you get bored and you can't sleep tonight. That's like 6 pages of pure fun that you can read through. Otherwise, we put together just like a quick snapshot of what that rubric all entailed. I've never spent so much time with one rubric, I don't think, in my entire life. I'm not gonna miss it, I'm not gonna lie. But we put there like the overarching 7 main categories that we thought for all students in Waukesha should have in a strong curriculum resource. And each one was broken down into different criterias. So overall, we looked at 27 different criteria points that we thought were the most important, and we used that scoring criteria in the upper right-hand corner to assess all 8 resources to begin with, and then we broke it down to 6 resources, and then 3 resources, and then finally, our last point was just the comparison of the top 2, and it was hands down, you could tell that Agile Mind was above and beyond everybody's favorite choice, highest scores over and over and over again. So yes, that I think was a great rubric that we created and spent a lot of time to make sure that all teachers were on the same page when they were assessing each curriculum.
Before I get into costs, I think another point that I want to make mention of is, and it's been stated in different ways, that in switching to an integrated approach, we will be eliminating at our freshman level remedial courses. So students have historically been able to take remedial algebra if they weren't ready for regular algebra. And our data, when we looked at that, and right, part of our why of switching to an integrated approach is that we weren't remediating kids. Those courses were not actually closing the gap. And so the teachers have talked a lot about Agile Minds, but I think one of the biggest important pieces in our discussion that we had when we were going through this rubric was it was a tool that truly allowed us to differentiate in a way that for some of our teachers they haven't had to do before. And so that takes work. It's the art and craft of teaching. It's difficult, and this is a resource that will definitely support that. So with that comes the cost of a great resource, which is not cheap. So we're looking at a 6-year agreement. We know that any good curriculum takes time to learn and then, again, be able to adapt. And so we're looking at roughly $207,000, which would include our students to have online access, which is where this platform is delivered, for both for integrated 1, 2, and 3. So that's pretty hefty. That's going to support us for quite some time in all of our courses. It also includes student workbooks, so we know we'll have students who won't be able to access the online materials for whatever the reason. My iPad broke, I had a concussion, right? And so getting some hard copies for students who won't be able to access it. It includes an assessment tool, which again is really essential as teachers. We don't want teachers creating their own assessments over and over and over again. It sometimes leads to watering down of the standard. And so this assessment tool ensures that we are teaching to the rigor of the standard and assessing to the rigor of the standard. And then I think most importantly, we know that with any new tool, we're going to need onboarding with how this works, how it functions. And so the quote also includes Agile Minds coming to us and doing some professional learning in conjunction with the Dana Center, which is out of the University of Austin, and it's Texas, Austin. I had it right. And we're really excited about that because, as you know, these amazing teachers have done a lot, especially during a COVID pandemic. We're at that place now where the rubber meets the road, and we're going to have to start writing our scope and sequence, writing the curricular units of study. And Agile Minds was one of the few companies that will actually not only support the development of how to use the resource, but how to develop the scope and sequence. And so we were really excited about that because we don't want to continue to add things to teachers' plates, especially during this COVID pandemic. They'll be part of the process, but we'll have that support as well. In terms of CPM, if you're wondering about costs, it is comparable. We won't have a final cost. We have a ballpark of about $50,000, but it's going to depend on student enrollment within our dual language program. And so we are kind of ballparking it. I don't anticipate it going over $50,000. We're actually meeting tomorrow with the rep to finalize numbers. But again, until we get our enrollment, we won't know. With integrated, we know what our numbers will be because all students are required to take that integrated 1 class. So our next steps is we have a Winter Institute coming up, and we are going to be inviting teachers to take part in the process of beginning to draft a backwards design sequence for integrated 1, 2, and 3. We know that we need to start at where we want students to be at the end and then plan backwards. We're going to be drafting the syllabus and units of study for integrated math 1 and 2. So I know I mentioned this last time, but you'll see a lot of me and Dan and this team this year because we will be bringing those forward for your review as well. And then we'll be coming back to you in March with the work that we've completed. So we're excited. It's now that we have the resource, we can really get going. And so it's an exciting time. questions that you have for our team.
Yeah, just clarity on the cost. The $207,000 for Agile Minds. You said it was a 6-year commitment. Is that a cost per year?
That is a total cost for the 6
And
years.
the same thing for the $50,000 for CPM is for
Correct.
the total cost for 6 years.
Correct.
But they're both 6-year contracts.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Baumgart.
Yeah, just something I want to clarify between Agile Minds and is it CPM? I understand the need to have both covered. Do they end up in the same place for our kids? That's what I'm wondering of it.
I will let the teachers speak to that, but I'm going to nod my head as Leslie shares a little bit more context behind that answer.
Thank you.
One of the agreements that we have had from the beginning, as we started looking at all of these resources, is that we want to have semester and final exams be common, no matter what resource we're using, because we have to take them to the same end result. It's one of the things that we have decided from the very start. We cannot do it any other way. We cannot not have common assessments, because otherwise, what would the rigor and the fidelity be? So, yes.
Thank you. That was exactly what my point was. The other one was just an observation. When you talked about Agile Minds is slightly challenging, you can read that two ways by comparing it to the rest of them. And the rest of them are either more challenging or less challenging. We can't tell what's like. So we want some challenging. Is slightly challenging just a good description?
We always say struggle, not suffer. That's that zone of proximal development for students. We want them to struggle with their learning. That's what grows them. But we never want students to suffer as they're doing it.
Okay,
And I think the data suggests that this is a resource that will kind of meet us in that middle point.
Thanks. Anything else? Okay. Mr. Como?
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, just one of the comments that you made in Agile Minds comment, the why behind the how. That is huge. I'll tell you, I learned the how pretty darn tootin' well when I was in high school. I got up to college, and I'm in my math class. I don't even remember which one it was now. And we're having to write essays. And I'm sitting here going, essays? This is math. No, come on. Are you serious? And it had to do with the why. Why do we do this? Why does math exist? How do we apply math? And to be able to have kids talk about it, too. Not that we never had any group conversations or problems to solve, but it was more about the how and not the why. So that's huge. I got really excited when you made that one comment. I don't think I've been that excited about one comment in a meeting at T&L for a long time, but that was huge. So thank you.
Got to get you a life, Joe.
I guess.
Mr. O'Brien.
Mr. Como, that's the difference between going to a liberal arts school and going to an engineering school. We never worried about how, we just did it. Or why. Why, yeah. That's,
I want to talk about the advantages of a liberal arts education.
Why was left for philosophy class? Yeah. No, it's great. I like where we're going with this. I liked it from day one. I can't wait for this to start. You know, the nice thing about computers, it allows all the stuff that when I was at school, they had to draw on the chalkboard for you, and then you had to kind of figure out what he was drawing because they weren't very good artists, these math teachers. But so the computers give you all the visuals of math that you didn't have easily in the past. So you can teach so much more in a much broader range in high school. I think we have always had a great math program in Waukesha. Well, at least my time here. I just think this is a huge step forward even for us, considering at the high level we've been at over the years. So I'm thrilled about it. I don't expect to see a lot of essay writing about math in high school, but maybe there could be some, I guess. I think I had to write one when I was in high school, but never in engineering school.
Anything else from the committee? Well, Rachel, thank you so much to you and your team for your thoroughness. You've really done a complete job, you know, all of you, especially that have been here even longer than Rachel. pulling all this together and bringing it forth to something that's going to benefit students and staff in this district for a long time. So we look forward to your coming back in the spring.
I'll be back next month seeking approval for you
Okay.
to adopt the resource, but the team will be sitting that one out.
Come
But
back in the spring.
they'll be back. Everybody will be back in March.
Sounds good. Thanks to each and every one of you. Very, very nice job tonight. Very
Thank
thorough.
you.
Thank you. Our last discussion information item this evening is learning environment transition criteria. We have Dr. Siebert here and also Dr. Cook that will be leading us through this discussion item.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Dietz. And I will do the introduction and be the slide presenter, and Dr. Cook is the featured attraction this evening. And right, please. So we're very excited to share with you this evening. We have two components of this presentation that Dr. Cook is going to walk through. The first is going to be updates to our mitigation strategies since we've started school this fall, so you can see some of the new pieces that we've been using. And the second then is looking at the transition criteria that we've been talking about for quite some period of time. And so what we've done is we've incorporated your feedback, your collective feedback from the November board meeting. And actually, Mr. Clark came into cabinet the morning after with a piece of paper about this big, all drawn up with incorporating a lot of the comments that the collective board made, and tried to piece that together for us in a meaningful way. And we've had some additional conversations in cabinet, and we feel really good about what we're going to discuss with you tonight. So if you recall back to that night, some of you we talked about, and I have said it too, the gates are already open. So we're talking about transition criteria in terms of the district types of pieces we should look at. That's incorporated. We also had some board members talk about the community criteria, and we have to look at that in terms of what's happening in the community and surrounding us, as schools are microcosms of a community. And so you'll see that contained within there. And then we also had that discussion around the board wanting to retain the ability to make that final decision, which we very much understand and appreciate, whether we're going to go to full face-to-face or revert full virtual. And you'll see that contained within this plan as well. So you'll also see a few other pieces. So we'll dive into it. And before we dive into it, I just also really want to say that Dr. Cook and I are partners in this, and we really appreciate the autonomy that you've given us to be able to make decisions at the classroom and school level to date. And we feel like we've been very successful in doing that to keep our schools open and to work with the principals to make those decisions. So we're very grateful for that, and we're very excited to walk through this presentation with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Cook.
Thank you. So a couple of things that we just wanted to review on the slide. Just kind of want to go through just what are our current learning models right now. Just want to make the committee aware again that we're at the elementary level 5 days a week, face-to-face, that we've provided families with an option for a virtual tied to our elementary schools, and that we've provided e-Achieve at the elementary as an option for families. And then at the secondary level, we just have begun hybrid learning again, where Monday is virtual for all, and then we have cohorts on Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday for the rest of the kids, grades 6 to 12, that we have a virtual live streaming option for families. I believe the last time we looked at the data, there was somewhere between 250, 300 students who selected that at the secondary level out of a total of about 5,500 kids. So it's an option for families that has not been widely used. And then e-Achieve, and e-Achieve's numbers this year, again, at the elementary and at the secondary level have been up. So you can see the options that families have had, and then where we are at as of this meeting today. At the board meeting, if you could just advance one more, we were going to present to you on that night some updates to the mitigation plan, and these updates were updates that have been learned as we started the school year. And so what we wanted to look at is failing to comply with mandated quarantines. Like we've discussed at some meetings, and it's been brought to your attention. We have had families send a child who was a known positive to school. I guess at the beginning of the year, we're hopeful that that wouldn't have happened, but we learned that it did happen. We have dealt with a couple of those situations through student discipline. The Friday before Thanksgiving, we sent a message to all families that students who are sent to school known positive will be dealt with on a level 3 disciplinary level, and they may face an automatic transfer to virtual learning for the remainder of the school year. When this situation has played out in our schools, it has been a substantial disruption to the learning of many, as we have had to send kids home from school, as we have had to quarantine students for long periods of time, and that we have also then had to disrupt the work environment, I guess, for the parents as the kids have had to transition to virtual learning, particularly at the lower grades. On the next slide, transportation. We set out this school year to have a transportation plan. Initially, we were going to load the buses from the back, then to the front. As we worked with our bus company on the first couple days of school, we realized that when you then drop kids off in the afternoon, unless they're seated in the exact same spot as they were on the pickup, it was very difficult to try to get them off without having to pass each other front to back. It didn't work well with our routing, so we changed our transportation to address that particular piece. So it's the loading and the unloading of students on the bus. Next slide, please. I apologize. I probably need to strengthen my prescription there to read what we're at for face coverings. Music, our mitigation strategies around music this year. We had our music teachers do some research around what would potentially be proper PPE for the classroom. And so we wanted to give kids an opportunity to participate in music. Neighboring school districts are doing that. So we have purchased covers for the end of wind-based instruments, and we have certain PPE where the instrument then can fit through the mouth, and we have social distancing. We talked to our schools and our music staff, and particularly at the secondary level. Now that we've transitioned to hybrid learning, it's much easier then to have fewer kids in the classroom when performance is going on. So we feel confident in this decision. It gives the kids a good opportunity, good advance. Food prep. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. We met with the foods staff as we transitioned from the 4-day face-to-face model, or I'm sorry, from the hybrid model at the beginning of the year to the 4-day face-to-face learning. We did some research within the food industry, and we allow kids now to have prepackaged, I guess I want to use the term meal, prepackaged, uncooked food in a manner that they can then put the food together, cook it, and then essentially it is either consumed by that student or it's disposed of, so that we're not risking any infection across the kids in the classroom. The library, we went to a 48-hour period where students then could get a book out of circulation. So if we can't clean it, it'll sit for 48 hours before we get it back into circulation. Just similarly, you see 72 hours on the bottom there. That's for the entire library space. I just want to let the committee know, though, that our custodial staff has been doing an excellent job of disinfecting at the end of the day. So all of the spaces that are used are disinfected at the end of the day, and very confident that the environment is cleaned at the end of each school day. Scroll ahead. We have maintained updated documents for employee relations for our staff attestation that essentially says that I'm not going to report to work if I'm sick or have symptoms. We have maintained a flow of communication and contact, if you could even go to the advance one more, with our questions and our processes. So our staff has been aware that who they must contact if they have symptoms or if they are a known close contact. This has been used regularly. We've had to send some reminders out to our teachers and staff in general as to who to contact. There will be one adjustment to this. We did hire an additional contact tracer that will be assisting with employee contact tracing. And so you will see Kay Oldenburg removed from the process, and we have a contact tracer now dedicated to staff so that Kay can resume some of her normal functions due to the volume that she's had to work with. We've talked, and we began the discussion at the full board a month ago on what are our criteria for transitioning from face-to-face. This would be at the classroom level, and how much infection is in the school before we decide to close a classroom or a school. And please know that these give us a benchmark to go off of. They give us some information to make a decision off of, but they're not hard and fast. And we'll talk about some of the circumstances where we've made a different decision that's different from the chart. We broke our schools out by size in this. We've got schools that are less than 200 this year in a face-to-face environment. Classroom infections, 3, and then we would close the classroom if it was contained to a classroom. And then if we had multiple classrooms affected, we would be looking at then closing and transitioning the school to virtual. Similarly, we have schools that are in the 2 to 400 range, which is the bulk of our elementaries, and then Saratoga. And we would be looking at 5 cases in a classroom. The reality of it is that one case at the elementary level in a classroom, based off of learning models, based off of the fact that the kids are eating lunch there, based off of just general movement of elementary kids, oftentimes one case is resulting in a classroom going into a quarantine. We know that is a difficult decision. It's a difficult decision for us to make. It is a difficult decision for families to have to deal with. But it's the reality of the environment that we're working in right now. Whereas at STEM, where the classroom environment is it's controlled a little bit differently, there could be some tendency to have more cases in a classroom and still not have to quarantine the whole classroom. The kids are older. They're able to control their bodies a little bit better. They have different spaces in the school where kids are able to lunch. They don't all have to lunch in the classrooms. So there's just different things that we consider by school and by environment. So you see that number there, 5. It's a little bit high based off of what our decision is. But if you also look then at the school transition to virtual, where are you contained to one classroom or do you have multiple classrooms going out? That 5 number seems to be a number that the schools have. Kind of the uncle point for the schools, like we can't go anymore because of the number of kids that have had to go into quarantine or the number of staff who have then been affected. There have been some decisions though where, for instance, this hasn't been implemented. And for instance, I'll use Higher as an example. I believe it was 2 weeks ago, Higher had the grade level at 4 and the grade level at 5 and a dual language section that were affected. The teacher was affected, the kids were affected, not infected, just affected. And they were transitioned to virtual, but the school stayed open because it did not, the staffing was such that the instruction was able to be maintained at school. There have been some schools where we've transitioned them to virtual with fewer cases or at that level 5 because of the number of staff that then have been affected. For instance, if you have a student with a disability who works with a speech and language pathologist, a couple of instructional aides, a couple of special education teachers, and a couple of general education teachers, one student then in that close proximity, they could take out a lot of staff, and then we don't have the ability to bring in substitute teachers. So we monitor these things. We use this as a guideline, and it's kind of like it's a bar that we're trying to measure ourselves towards. If we hit that bar, then we start to engage in discussion with the principal and where are things at. We really look then at staffing, but it gives us some flexibility to say, hey, we can run this or we can't run it. When we, for instance, you see the Blair campus up there, and on the next slide you'll see Butler. We had to transition Butler to virtual for a period, and the Butler staff, I believe they had, I think it was 14 or 15 staff members that were on quarantine, and the staff had already gone through a extended period of time where period by period, they were giving up their prep periods to substitute teach. And you run into, doing that several weeks where you're not getting your opportunity to plan, you're not getting your opportunity to do the extra during the day, and then you hit a critical number of staff, and we had to go virtual in that situation. Similarly, at Les Paul, we had a lot of kids go out, and we had a number of staff get affected by it, either through quarantine or through their own illness, and we had to transition Les Paul virtual. If you advance, you can see the next level. We don't have any schools currently in the 600 to 800 range. We have that on there, though, as a decision point because we could. If families at the high school level, for instance, decided to pull their students, just look at North up there, they have 973 students currently this year that are in a face-to-face model. If suddenly we ran into an environment where a bunch of parents decided to go virtual at North, we then would have a school that would fall into that 600 to 800 range. So we do have a scale there. And then you see where we're at our high schools. Each of our high schools has had to go virtual. 2 of them, due to the number of student staff cases, the quarantines, South and West have been in that environment. We had to transition North virtual due to the number of staff that were out for an extended period of time. The important thing to know, on our dashboards, and if you visit our website, you can see our dashboards. There may be times where you see, that we have 10 staff out or 8 staff out. And during a given school year, any other school year, we could have 8 to 10 staff out for professional development, sick, whatever it might be. What we're not reporting on our dashboard at the moment, and we'll get into what we're going to be proposing as part of our criteria, is people who are out, for instance, on bereavement. That they may have a parent die, a loved one die. So you get the people who are out because they're sick with COVID, they're quarantined with COVID, and then there's a bereavement situation, and suddenly you have too many people out of your building to staff. And we'll talk about a little bit about where we're at with our overall staff percentages in a few minutes. We are looking at some benchmarks, and I'll show you in a little bit how these are justified. The number of teachers who are out at a 20%, this is what we were proposing again 3 weeks ago at the board meeting. Number of students who are out, 25%. So again, what's the threshold? Our ranges due to quarantine and COVID, we have had classrooms get quarantined and a large number of students get quarantined, but only 1 or 2 teachers is out of a building, which is very easy because all kids transition to virtual. The teacher is able to instruct. We've also had some situations where we've had near 35% of our staff out of a building. Higher experienced that early this year. And we felt after learning from that that's way too many staff to have out and still to run the school in a face-to-face. The people who were there were pulling quite a heavy load for us. If you advance them, please, to the next slide. So this is what we are proposing. This is what Dr. Siebert alluded to before. We have 8 criteria that we've identified that incorporate both district data and then community data. And there is 2 points on there that are kind of a yes or no, and we would have to close similar to like a school day, a snow day, I'm sorry. The first one is food service, and I'll just jump to those. If the food service is affected to the degree that they can't make meals in the district, we then would have to close our schools and go virtual until we ran into a point where we could restaff food service. We haven't had to make that decision yet, but given the environment that we're in and the level of spread that's been going on, it's possible that we ran into that. The second area is transportation. If the bus company was not able to provide enough bus drivers to cover a substantial number of our routes, we would then have to treat that similar to a snow day and say, we can't go today. So the committee knows, we have benefited from the fact that the Milwaukee Public Schools is virtual. We have had situations where enough Waukesha first student drivers have either been quarantined or COVID positive, and we have had to draw on substitutes from the Milwaukee terminals. If Milwaukee goes back into a face-to-face environment where they are running their transportation, that could be a very real situation for us. And it would be a kind of a touch and go day by day, week by week discussion. And we're fortunate that MPS is virtual right now because we know that we would have had to go virtual because of bus drivers if they were if they were in session. So what we're proposing, given now a trimester / quarter and a half of experience in school, is a trigger point for us to say, Board of Education, we need to schedule a meeting, and we need to take a look at the status of things in Waukesha as to our learning levels. And we'll go through those momentarily here. We're proposing that 25% student absenteeism for 5 consecutive days. And Dr. Siebert, if you could click on that link, please. We're also proposing putting this on our district dashboard, district website. And so you can see under student absenteeism, the ranges that we have had through our busiest COVID times and through what have been some just regular days of school. Through our busiest times as a district, and we're not looking at schools now, we're looking at the total number in the district, we've had between 70 and 80% student absenteeism. There have been some days that have been pretty low in the low 70s. There have been other days across our entire system that have been pretty good. And you can see that they're distinguished between the purple and the pink on the screen right now as to what falls into that, for lack of a better word, like danger zone. So this would be student absenteeism. If you could go back to the presentation, please. Then we have staff absenteeism, and this was an area that was discussed pretty substantially. I'm sorry, Mr.
Just wanted to define absenteeism. That's staff that are absent for whatever reason. They may be absent because they're being quarantined, right?
Correct. So as we transition into staff, absolutely. If you're sick with the stomach flu, if you are quarantined because of COVID, if you have COVID, if you are out because your parent passed away and you need some time off, that is what goes into this particular number.
So absenteeism would include, it's kind of a difficult number to calculate right now, but would it include a staff member who's having to teach virtually from home because they're on quarantine?
Yes, we spent a lot of time, we are talking about people who physically can be present in the building versus people who physically cannot be present in the building. And so we're not trying to get those folks that are trying to make a go of it. These are our employee pools. And this includes our custodians, our aides, our office staff, our teaching staff. And the only people who are pulled out of this data are eAchieve staff because they never, in essence, would be virtual or would be in a face-to-face setting. So what you can see here is on the high end, from a staff absenteeism rate, I think our highest on there is like 16.2%. And then we've been as low as 7% absenteeism. And the number that we're going off of is about 1,450 people. I don't have that exactly figured on this sheet right now, but that factors in teachers, aides, custodians, office staff, administration. It's all of the bodies then that would be assigned to our school minus eAchieve. And you can see back on that page, you see some of those numbers in that orangish color. Those are numbers that are getting close to, maybe we have to talk about this, but again, they're not hitting that 20% of the people out of the buildings. And these again are proposed numbers, and they're certainly up for discussion, but they were kind of our best, first grab at where we're at with our data. We have sub rate. Below 75% subfill rate. This is an area, if you look at the yellow is kind of the good number on here, and the blue is a challenge. We have had a challenge, and we believe that we will continue to have a challenge finding substitute teachers for our students. So that again is something that the board needs to know, that subs have been a challenge, that we have a lot of teachers piecing a lot of things together, but we, like all other school districts, are facing the sub shortage that exists this school year. Go back to the presentation. So those are data points, and then 25% of our buildings that are in virtual learning. So what I'd like for you to think is, and right now, all of our schools are in face-to-face. We don't have any schools that have transitioned fully to virtual at this point. So what I'd like for you to think is criteria 1, all of these criteria are district. So it would be criteria 1 plus criteria 2 plus criteria 3 plus criteria 4, right? So these things start to add up. And then we transition, we talked about food service and transportation. Then we start talking about the city of Waukesha plus the village of Waukesha. And the reason why we picked the city and the village is because we were able to get a defined population for the both. It comes out to about 81,000, 81.5 people. And we know that those kids in that area are assigned wholly to the Waukesha school. If we get into Pewaukee, Brookfield, Genesee and such, we know that a lot of the kids in those communities are assigned elsewhere, so we didn't want to consider them in the population. The math works itself out as you look at a percentage of the population over 100,000. So we're using 100,000 as a benchmark. When we talked last week at the board, 3 weeks ago at the board meeting, we're looking at 1,100 positive cases per 100,000 in the community. And that was the number that we talked about if we adjusted the scales on what was considered gating criteria. That was kind of that like, hey, now Waukesha is finally in the chart after we multiplied it over. We know that this is a high number. It's well beyond what anybody is recommending, but it's the reality that everybody is above it. I think it was 97% of the counties in Wisconsin were at 1,000 or more cases per 100,000 when we had the board meeting. So we know that number has continued to go up. And Dr. Siebert, if you could click on it, you can see in the blue there, the yellow represents weekends where they're not collecting data. You can see in the blue there then what our history has been. And we're currently at about, I think it's a 2180s, almost 2,200 cases per 100,000 in the community. We don't want to set a benchmark that's unreasonable, otherwise the data doesn't mean anything. This would help us, I guess, as we start to have the discussion in the other direction, like, hey, we want to go back to 4 days a week or whatever it might be based off of a community number. We know that this is going to be an indicator. It's always going to be an indicator as long as we believe COVID's around that, hey, we have this community issue. But we wanted to factor in where the community was at because we know at some point we're going to have to talk about transitioning in the other direction. If this is a recommended, like, hey, the environment is very chaotic right now, we might need to transition to another level of learning. This is what you have in front of you. But if we go backwards and say, hey, let's go 4 days a week again, or let's go to a 5-day-a-week model, this can help us in that direction. If you go back to the presentation, then we have the hospital information as well. And this is the thing that we continue to hear about. We take this data straight from Waukesha County, their dashboard. It's updated every Wednesday. Dr. Siebert, if you could click on the first link, we'll get you to both slides. We're factoring in acute beds, and those acute beds would be the things that if you broke your leg and needed a night in the hospital, if you were sick with something other than COVID that didn't require ICU. And then we also have the ICU beds. So we're factoring in both because that's really what the hospital's capacity is to care for somebody who's sick. And you can see that right now, I believe that we're at 74 and 63% for both the acute beds and then the ICU beds. So we set our benchmarks at 75 and 85%, 75% for acute beds and 85% for the ICU beds. You can see where our data is at. And so then if we hit these markers, if you get back to the presentation, please, and you go to the next, what our recommendation is then if we hit 6 of them, then we would convene a board meeting to discuss the transition from one learning level to the next. And we believe, and in our discussions and what we heard certainly from the board, there's a decision that the board would want to make. We heard that loud and clear. Are we in virtual? Are we in hybrid? Are we in 4 days a week of face-to-face? We heard that loud and clear, and that's very appropriate for this environment. But we also needed to have benchmarks that both addressed in-district numbers, which is why we present 4 to you, and then community numbers, which is why we presented those 3 community numbers to you. And then we kind of have the 2 gimmies in it, in that if we can't run, we can't run because we can't make food or we can't get the kids to school. So we know right now, based off of our experience, that for sure one of those criteria is met, and that's the community cases. If we had this meeting last week before Thanksgiving, we would have had a second criteria hit, and that would have been the number of schools in virtual. At that time, we had 6, so we would be at 2. From a student attendance rate, we have come close to needing to, as far as the criteria goes, we're in that 5 consecutive days based off of our recommendation. That we had that low of a overall attendance rate in the district. And those attendance, that student absence is quarantine, sick with COVID, family vacation, whatever it might be, you're not there outside of selecting virtual, that the parent selection for virtual. So this is our stab at it right now. Like Dr. Siebert said, Darren Clark had an appropriate amount of detachment from the conversation at the board meeting and was able to, I think, intellectually analyze where everybody was at in their position. So, Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, well, he's the only guy nobody's throwing bricks at, so that's easier to do that. Going back to the ICU beds versus the acute beds, that ratio. When I look at the historical data, the ICU beds are always at a lower percentage than the acute beds. So it almost looks like those two criteria are, like they're flipped. I mean, if one's always lower than the other one, but you have it higher than the other one.
Yeah, and
maybe there's a medical reason for it, but I assume the reason we're saying we want to watch the beds is because, look, that's when the community itself is in a crisis situation. And we need to take action to try and make sure we're not contributing to that at that point, because no hospital beds means people are not able to get care.
Correct. And we had a very interesting call with the county, I think it was 2 weeks ago. The county shared that the hospitals aren't coming out and saying, my hospital is at 95% full. And because that is essentially a private business and they don't want to show what their true capacity is. So if you've paid attention to the county dashboard, the county used to represent this number solely as a percentage. They have now added a graph on there that shows a range by which, and I believe that range represents not only the number of beds that are being used, but also the capacity to staff and care for the patients. And that may be ultimately what then, it doesn't matter what the percentage is. We may have too many doctors and nurses that are affected, and they then can't care.
Yeah, because we may never hit those percentages because, like, they don't have to disclose that. They're not required to. They're private businesses.
Yep.
And they don't want to say they're full. And that's all across the country. I mean, they're doing the same thing. They're not full until they are full, and then they say, we're full, go to some other hospital someplace else because we can't take you. So I'm a little bit, but that's really a community issue. I guess what I like about what we've been trying to do is be transparent. We're just saying, look, we're doing the best we can as a school district to keep kids in school, to operate in a safe way. We don't want to go virtual. We don't want to be quarantining tons of kids. We're trying to avoid that. And this highlights that we're aware of the situation and environment we're operating in. And we're aware of what we're trying to do versus what other school districts across the country are trying to do. And we're all struggling with it. I mean, nobody has the right answer on this thing yet. So I like it better that it's at a committee where we don't have to fight and argue about stuff. We're just collecting information, and this is quite helpful. And it matches with what I will share at the committee, though, is that what's going to, and I think you'll probably agree with this, Mr. Cook, what's going to really hurt us is this massive rise in active child cases within our attendance area. Doesn't mean it's Waukesha kids, but 10 days ago it was 131 cases.
Yep. And
today it's 210, 216.
Yeah.
That's a big jump. From the time when this is the one thing about, well, ours go up, ours goes down, but it tells you if the community has a lot of children with active cases, it's affecting everybody with school-aged children. What I will say, we've been tracking this for 9 weeks now. And when we started tracking this 9 weeks ago, it was 28 hospitalized kids. And now we're at 216.
That's for the community.
Yeah. So I'd have to go back and look at the active child cases. It goes back a ways. 41. So we're about 5 times what we were some time back. So we are operating in a tough zone, and it continues to get tougher. And that's why we're seeing quarantines happen when we don't want to see quarantines happen. I think we were all hopeful we could start post-Thanksgiving with no quarantines, right? Doesn't work that way. We already had, what is it, 3 classes out now?
3 or 4 classrooms, yeah.
Yeah, 3 or 4 classrooms out within the first couple of days. And
You know what?
I know we have the critics out there saying we're just quarantining too many kids, but we're following the guidelines that the county wants us to follow, the CDC wants us to follow, and I do believe that hybrid will help us. If we can have less kids getting potentially infected in school, have that transmit down into elementary kids, and then elementary kids bring it back up into the classroom via the families, that's going to result in more elementary shutdowns. I think the only other thing we could do to keep kids in school and maybe help families is if instead of quarantining those kids at their homes, if we could find a way of creating a classroom that's widely spaced remotely from the rest of the school, so you could still get those kids into a classroom. Like if we had a massive gym floor we could put them on or something like that, so that we didn't have to tell parents like, hey, you got to take 2 weeks off from school tomorrow, for taking care of your kids. I mean, that's about the only other thing I could think of to try and help families.
This summer, when we were coming up with the mitigation plan, we talked about the distancing in the classroom and the plexiglass and, all of those components. And when we met with our elementary principal team, we have developed learning models and teaching models where you have collaborative space. And in that process of getting there, the desks that we were once accustomed to in the classrooms, they're not there anymore. And so, when we were kids and in school, you had, 25 kids in the classroom, you all had your little desk, it flipped up on top, and that's just what you did. Now you sit at tables, and those tables, we can contain kids over the course of the instructional period at those tables. But then we have the dynamic of lunch. The masks come off. And then you have the dynamic where the kids have to move their trays around. And then you run into the kids, because they're elementary age, where the mask starts to come off while they're doing it, right? They're not intentionally doing it. They're little kids. They forget the masks and the whole business. And then they quickly rush to get them on. But now you've got that time without the mask and then the movement in the classroom. Our default this whole year has been to stay open. And it's been to try to get the kids in school, to try to keep them there as much as we possibly can. We've evolved as a system to an instructional place that was never designed to truly withstand a pandemic, and now we have a pandemic on top of what is really good instructional practice. It just gets impacted by a positive COVID case in the classroom.
Mr. Bryan.
So the only hole I see in our day-to-day is, now that we're back to hybrid, I haven't been back in the schools, and I don't really think I belong in the schools right now, because we're trying to keep everybody isolated. But we need to get the kids reaccustomed to the socially distancing practices that they can now achieve in hybrid at the secondary level, which includes lunch practices. We can talk about bars and restaurants being bad, but I can tell you what, the school lunchrooms aren't much better when we're packing all the kids into the schools. But we can make them better now that we're in the hybrid model, because we do have to get these numbers down if we're going to keep our elementary schools open.
Yeah, and
it's just a fact. The way the system's set up right now, the more infections we have in the community, the more it impacts our schools, right?
Well, with the proposed change to quarantine, that the CDC has started discussing within the last week or so, where the quarantine goes from 14 days down to, a 7-day period or whatever it might be, that makes these transitions a little bit easier if they are needed, when they are needed. But that hasn't yet been approved at the CDC level, which hasn't then trickled down into states from a guidance standpoint. But, where do we, what does it look like for us when we hit that point in a hybrid model? Fewer and fewer kids are going to be out for an extended period.
But that CDC guideline, doesn't that call for all the kids to be tested to bring them back within that 7-day period?
I haven't heard enough of it yet. I've only heard it discussed. I haven't seen any formal
I think it's
guidance on
saying
it, so.
that you're going to end up testing all those kids to bring them back. In other words, what we're doing now is we're not testing kids.
Right.
We're just quarantining them and saying, well, you must not be sick now after 14 days. They're willing to shorten the quarantine period, providing all the kids get tested, which there's a plus to that. We'll find out how many kids are actually getting sick.
Right.
But as I recall, that's the switch that makes them consider this. But anyway.
Mr. Como.
Thank you, Mr. Dietz. I would, if I had to choose one word to describe what we've done and what we continue to try to do, it would be surgical. We have tried very hard to impact the fewest number of people given whatever situation it is at a particular school. And that's difficult. That is difficult. But I think we've been surgical, and people do appreciate that. As the end goal is to give as much face-to-face instructional time to each student. That's what we're trying to do. And the approach that we've taken, I think, has balanced out a number of factors that go into keeping that instruction maximized as much as possible face-to-face. I've spoken with people who said, well, the children just don't pass this along and they are not impacted. And yes, they are not impacted the same way that other age groups are. But I'll tell you what, if we don't have teachers, we have no instruction going on. And I know I'm oversimplifying this, and we all have our points of view. And we can all get the data to prove our points of view correct. But I do believe that our surgical approach, taking a look at each school, each classroom, and analyzing that, and I appreciate the approach you're taking here, where it's not just like one number that's going to drive everything to close the school or to close, to go 100% virtual or whatever. There's a lot of things to balance here. And I hope our constituents can see that this is not just a quick little easy decision to make. And I do like the way that we have divided up having the granular decisions be in the administration's hands, having those larger systemic kinds of decisions at the board level. And that's the way we typically operate. I mean, no matter what we're doing in this district, that's how we operate. And I'm glad that we have continued to take that approach when there's been pressures put on us to really not take that approach. I believe it's worked well. There is no map on this to follow. And we're making up the map and we're navigating through it all at the same time. But everyone is. It's not just our district. Everyone is. Our whole country is experiencing this for the first time. So I can really respect the work that you guys have done, taken the comments, and it was a difficult board meeting. The last board meeting was difficult talking on these topics. And I really think that you listened well and balanced a lot of things out with what you're presenting here. So I'm liking what I'm seeing.
Dr. Siebert.
I would be very remiss if I didn't recognize Mary Jo, who put together the presentation and who is really the driver behind the dashboard. So one of the pieces that we've been hearing consistently is the transparency, right, around the criteria and how we're making the decisions. And so all of the examples that we showed you can now be part of the dashboard in a way that people can very realistically see what are the criteria, how long do they have to exist, and where are they currently within the district. So Mary Jo has done really remarkable work, and so has the cabinet in general. So any other questions you have or feedback you have, we'd welcome.
Mr. Baumgart.
No, I agree also with what we're seeing here, being more comfortable with this than what we were discussing at the last board meeting, where one big number affected the whole district or the whole schools, or Joe's word, surgically looking at it. This makes more sense. I was very uncomfortable with some of those things that they said, well, if we get to this point, you're going to shut down the school, without giving any thought to the fact that maybe we don't need to shut down the school, which is the way we've been looking at it, and I think we must continue to do that. So I do appreciate this, and are we going to get a copy of this or put online for us? This presentation or stuff in there, it's a little hard to see. And
however you'd like to
We
share.
certainly can share this with you electronically.
That'd be fine.
It just, with all of this whole page is linked. So I think it would be better for you to get it electronically, and then you can go in and see how it all.
However you can do it, yeah. So again, my compliments with this. I'm sure we're going to be finding ways to improve it or do something different, or maybe something didn't work right, but I'm more comfortable with this than what we had in November.
Mr. O'Brien.
So, Joe made a comment that I think almost everybody makes the same comment about the idea that children are less impacted by this. But there's the other side that people don't really talk about or accept or even consider. When you have a rate that we're operating in here across the state, but let's just leave Waukesha as an example. There's no roadmap for that, to try to run a school district with this positivity rate. We just know that we have to try because that's what our community wants us to do. And that's what we're doing. We're trying. At some point, we're going to find out through this holiday period, it'll be about 3 weeks what the Thanksgiving impact was. It takes about 3 weeks to see that. And then after that, a Christmas impact. I think the one comment people have made that have studied schools that are doing what we're trying to do in a high area is the concern that schools may not be able to be seen so readily, but we may actually be contributing to the positivity in the community because of the mixing of kids that are asymptomatic. And that's could be helping to keep the elevated rates high. I don't want to use the word help, but it could be impacting that. Nobody's been able to define that yet, but that's the concern people have. As we try to keep schools open, are we making it harder for us to drive down our positivity rates, drive down the infection of the communities? Nobody has come out and said that yet. There have been a few people that have speculated in that regard. So either way, we have to do the best that we can given what the community is asking of us. So.
I just want to thank all of you as well. Cabinet, Darren Clark, we haven't mentioned him specifically, but it sounded like he had a lot to do with all that. But just for listening and coming up with more specific criteria, taking some of the emotion out of it, which sometimes puts in roadblocks and gets in the way. But objective criteria that you can actually wrap your head around and actually examine and actually make good decisions on. So I really appreciate all the behind-the-scene work that you do in this area. I'm sure it's most of your job, if not all of it. And it's hard work, and with your continued efforts and our continued feedback, I think we'll continue to fine-tune that. And I look forward to being being a part of that and working with you to continue to get things back on track as we can. So thank you very much for the presentation and all the behind-the-scene work that went into tonight. Okay, we are under other business at this time. Any recommendations from any committee members for future committee meetings? Mr. Bryan.
I would just say that I think this worked out well tonight, that we keep something like this at the committee level. If there's a need to move it to the full board for action, it should go to the committee first, if at all possible. Should we ever decide to adopt a criteria or something like that through a formal board action. We're not ready to do that tonight. This is just a discussion, but I think it provided the transparency that we're looking for. But if there was ever an idea to move forward with some sort of criteria that the board was to adopt, I think it should go through the committee process, because it's too hard to be managing this stuff at the full board meeting. It's a lot easier to work it out in committee and then take it to the full board meeting.
And then how will other board members know about tonight's presentation, other than?
We were planning on including the presentation in Friday's update.
Okay, great.
If it's okay, we'd do it electronically just for this because of the links and everything that people
Sounds
can
good.
see.
Awesome. Any other recommendations? Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned. Our next Teaching and Learning Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, January 5th, 6 p.m. here in the boardroom. Thank you, everyone, tonight for your involvement and participation, and have a good evening.